Hello to everybody. If you don't mind turning on your video so we can see your bright, shiny, happy faces, that would be great. I'm so pleased to have you back for our second edition of our Gender Bias Workshop. And this time you're going to get some red meat. You're going to get tools to use. So now you're all excited about that. You like the practicalities of things. So let me reintroduce, for those of you who don't remember or weren't with us the first time, our delightful trainers. We're very fortunate to have them back and doing this. So first, I will introduce, since she's first on my screen, Alison Rapping. Alison is CEO of the Arrowhead Foundation, which is an organization dedicated to supporting, mentoring, and training women involved in America's justice system. She also serves as president of Alison Rapping and Associates, a strategy consulting firm that provides consult to community benefit organizations in the USA and Africa. Ali is a recognized leader in the nonprofit community, and she brings more than 25 years of nonprofit experience to this work, and also supported with her brother, Jonathan Rapping, AKA Rapp, and Ilium Askia, Rapp's wife, the development of Gideon's Promise, as she provided strategic and fundraising counsel and served as faculty training on community engagement, fostering healthy workplace relationships, and gender equity. She was named to the Business Journal's inaugural 40 Under 40 class of emerging leaders as a graduate of Valley Leadership. Ali received her MPA from UMass Amherst. I said Amherst right. See, you can't say Amherst. All right. Next, but not any lesser, Dr. Sandra Price, also known as Sandy, received her bachelor's and her Juris Doctoral degrees from Arizona State University and her doctoral degree from University of Missouri, Kansas City in Public Administration and Affairs. Her career spans 30 years as a policy strategist, lawyer, advocate, and capacity builder. She also has expertise in economic and inclusive community development, conflict resolution, nonprofit capacity building, strategic organizational diversity and inclusion, and organizational ethics and ethical engagement. Sandy just left her position at ASU to work in the community, but while at ASU, she helped found the first Watts College Diversity and Inclusion Committee, set their agenda, and pushed for the hiring of an Associate Dean of Inclusion and Equity. She sat on similar committees at the campus and school levels, and was one of only 6 scholars selected for the inaugural ASU Piper Fellow for Knowledge Exchange and Resilience, a program to connect the research resources of the university with the community. And she was an active faculty affiliate at the ASU Center for the Study of Race and Democracy. So obviously we have well-credentialed people leading us, and I'm going to turn it over to Sandy to begin that.
Thank you very much, Susan. And for those of you who were here at the first workshop, I'm sorry you had to listen to that long introduction to me for a second time. And I want to just start by telling you that we are going to do something quite different this workshop. We are almost entirely dedicated to tools today. And if you'll hang on for 1 second, I'm going to try to find the PowerPoint and open my, okay, hold on 1 second. Slideshow from the beginning. All right, can everybody see? Wave your hand if you can see the slideshow. Is there anything in front of it for anyone? If so, okay, thanks, Susan. All right, so this is where we are today. It's going to be all tools all day. It's going to feel a lot, although we will be talking about the tools in the context of gender bias, it's going to feel a lot like we are doing an organizational management workshop and not as much like a gender bias workshop. I want to just let everybody know that I'm going to go through, by necessity, we're going to go through a lot of material, Alison and I, today, and you're not going to feel like an expert by the end of the day. So I want to reassure you that Ali and I have put together a packet of much more detailed, specific workbooks and how-to manuals and stuff like that. And we will send it to you after today, so that if there's any particular piece of this that really strikes your interest and you want to know more about, you will have something on almost everything we talk about. If there is something that you want,
Mary Whitford, just after 1 o'clock on Wednesday. I'm calling you to talk to you about.
thank you, Susan. Yeah, if you have a noise in your background, or you might have somebody running through, or kids or whatever, if you're working at home today, you might want to turn your microphone off for the moment. Anyway, so if there is something else that you want, please don't hesitate to reach out to either myself, Allison, or Susan. I actually put our email addresses on the last slide. So let's just go right into the program. So I'm going to start with change management. And the reason I'm starting here is because as we talk a little bit about what organizations are like and how change can be successfully implemented and what some of the barriers are, I'm hoping that you will have that in the back of your mind as we then go through and talk about some more specific tools and that sort of thing. So you can be thinking, oh yeah, that would work with our culture. We'd have to approach it this way. In other words, I'm hoping to contextualize the rest of the day by starting with what it takes to affect change in an organization. So change obviously impacts people. It almost always involves changing the processes that we use internally in an organization. And it basically, there are many change models, but what I'm going to talk about mostly today is that finding the right model is a big help. And the right model is one that actually fits your organization's culture. And as I talk about culture, and I think you'll get the idea what that is. There's something like 13 pretty well-known change models out there. I am not going to bore you with like going through each of them in detail. What I am going to do is pick two that I think are generic in the way that they approach and could be adapted by any organization. And then I'm going to send you out some information about the nuances of the other models. And if any of them appeals to you from a cultural standpoint, you'll have that information. Okay, so first little order of logistics. I don't know about you, but what I see right now is I see the slide, which is filling my entire screen. And then I see 5 pictures, 5 faces. Mine is at the top for me, and then others. If that is in the way, you can use your cursor to grab that block of pictures and move it out of the way. All right, so change happens best when it fits your culture. I'm going to give you a short story that will help you understand this. It's not from the law world, but I think it will help. If you think about all of the do-gooders that have tried to go into third world countries and help people raise their well-being, their standard of living, their ability to feed their kids, whatever. We have a lot of Westerners with very good hearts and good intentions who have sometimes gone into, let's say, villages in African countries, and the outcome of their work has wreaked havoc. And I'll just give you a quick example. There was a group that went in and decided that what would really help the well-being of these communities was if they could help empower women to actually bring in some extra money and resources for their families. And so they went into these villages, and they organized women by going to the women who, had the most clout in the towns and asking them to gather women. Oops, I'm sure I did that, but I don't know how. Here we are. All right. And they taught them how to be, micro entrepreneurs, if you will. They gave them a chicken or enough money to purchase a chicken or whatever, and taught them to sell eggs, that level of thing. What ended up happening was the women became wildly successful to the great happiness of the NGO that went in to do this. But the men in those families became morose, and it began causing problems inside their families. And the men felt less necessary, and whatever other impacts that they had. So I'm going to stop the story right there to just get to the end of it. What they could have done differently was they could have started with the elders of the community, and they could have sold the benefits of the program to the community, and they could have included how this program benefited men, and they could have given men a role, if nothing else, that would have supported what their wife was doing, so that they felt that they were necessary to the program. And in fact, after this kind of floppy failure, they went back in and they did that. They went into the elders who had the power in the community. They sold the program on the basis of its benefits to families and to children and the future of their communities. The elders brought in everyone, men and women, and explained why they felt this was a good idea for their community, and involved everyone in the process, and that problem disappeared. So in the same way that those outsiders didn't really understand the culture of the community, and they went in with a great idea, when we are trying to affect change in an organization, we really need to understand the culture of the organization. Because if we try to push upstream against the culture, no matter how good our idea is, it's likely to fail. All right, so what exactly is an organizational culture? You can think of it as the personality of the organization. There are a lot of visible and audible signs about what culture is. And if you feel like it, if you think of, as I'm talking, if you think of features of your own culture that strike you as cultural features, feel free to open the chat and put them in there. I think examples will help people get the idea. So these visible audible signs are what kind of supervision and evaluations happen. Do people generally think of them as painful, or as an opportunity to touch base and benchmark and move forward in a positive way? How diverse is the community in your organization? Who gets the big offices? Who gets the little offices? Where are people's offices? What's the distribution? Is the furniture old and funky, or is the furniture, like kind of rigid and hard to sit on? What kind of symbolism is used in an organization? What kind of artwork is in the walls? What is your impression when you walk into the building? And how are people dressing? What's the length of the workday? Do they feel like they have to be there 11 hours and power has to see them there? Do you feel like you have to walk the hall so people know that you're there? Is your interaction with your peers casual or kind of rigid? How is status demonstrated? Okay, so those are just some of the outward signs of a culture. I remember when I started, when I was summer clerk at a law firm in Phoenix, I felt that I could take my jacket off. The suit that you wear as a young clerk is a suit, a blouse, a jacket, and a skirt or pants. And I felt that I could take the jacket off in my office, but I literally felt the place was so formal, I felt I had to put my jacket back on just to walk down to the bathroom. So those are the kinds of things that create, the feeling, the culture, the personality. There are also many invisible signs. What kind of policies limit or facilitate behavior? Do you feel free to actually be yourself, to say what is on your mind among your colleagues? Or do you feel like you have to conform and pretzel yourself to fit in? Do you feel there's camaraderie? Do people meet with each other after hours, or are people just pretty much siloed in their own offices doing their own work that you nod hello in the hall, but you barely talk? Do you feel like the rules are rigid or bendable? Are people tense or laid back? Is humor a good thing? I think it's always a good thing, but in some offices it's better than in other offices. How intense is the performance pressure? So these are all invisible things. And together they form the personality of the organization. I want to just mention that invisible things, some of them we know about, like policies. And some of them we sense, like I sensed I needed to put my suit jacket back on to go down the hall. But a lot of what we don't see in terms of culture, we can learn by listening or thinking about the stories that colleagues tell about their experience in an organization. And what I want to say about the stories are that they fill in those gaps. So I'm going to give you an example. This is a real story, but I'm going to let you decide what the ending is. So in this real story, an administrative assistant runs into the boss's office and says, you've got to come, you've got to come. They're killing each other on the 5th floor. And so the manager drops everything and goes to the stairwell because it's faster, and goes all the way up to the 5th floor or down, I don't remember, and opens the door to the set of offices on the 5th floor. And sure enough, there's like 10 people in the office involved in a brawl. Okay, so right now we have some clue about this organization. It's an organization where 10 people feel that they can engage in a brawl. Even if it's unusual, it still happened, right? Okay, so the end of the story, which is that you get to pick yourself, I'm going to give you 3 choices, and you can decide. So one of them, the manager says, somebody call the HR manager. And another one, the manager says, stop. And in the third one, the manager says, who's in charge here? Okay, so I don't know what you think the manager would say. You can pick one. But more importantly, each of those choices that the manager makes when confronted with a brawl tells you something about the culture, something about how they see accountability and responsibility. Do they take it themselves by yelling stop? Do they ask, who is the person who's supposed to be in charge in this space? Where are they? Or do they call for the outside HR person? Any of these choices tells you something about the organization. And it's those things that we learn from stories that help us understand our own culture. All right, I see that nobody put anything in the chat, and that's okay. I'm just going to move on. But if you have questions about what I'm talking about as we go, or comments, please feel free to use the chat to have a discussion among yourselves about what we're talking about, or to ask questions. Susan's watching the chat, and if there are questions for me, I'm happy to address them or make sure they're addressed. All right, so I'm going to start right here. This is a checklist. This is just common sense stuff you have to do for change management. And I'm not going to read them all off, but it's basically a checklist. If you were planning a party, you would have a checklist, figure out what the theme is. Who are we going to invite? What is a good when do we want to have it, etc. This is an important checklist, and it will, we'll give it to you later. But this stuff has to happen in the context of culture and the kinds of ways in which you find that projects, programs are facilitated inside your culture, and the kinds of barriers that you need to work around. So having a checklist like this, which you could probably easily find if you Google change management checklist, is not enough to actually make sure that the changes that you want to embed in your culture actually will stick and be durable. Okay, so I know this is going to make your eyeballs cross, and that's okay. I'm in a minute or two, you're going to understand this. I'm going to take this away and explain it to you better with better visuals. But what I want to say about this is a guy named Matt Fairholm, and I want to use actual research around management and change to make sure that we have stuff that's been studied and that works. But the shortcoming of most researcher work, if you know anything about how science proceeds, is that they look at what they've already decided they know, and then they say, what's the next little piece of this that we want to know? What is the next iteration or increment of knowledge that would naturally flow from what we've already learned about, say, leadership? And then they do research on those little teeny bits. Well, that's not very useful for managers. The reason it's not useful is because when you are in a situation, you don't get to split it up into hairs and call somebody to study each piece and then try to put it back together. What you have to do is synthesize the situation as you find it, take in all this data, and come to some conclusions. I chose this guy named Matt Fairholm, and I don't like his presentation because it's almost not usable this way. If you studied it for a while, you'd figure it out. But I like it because what he did is he looks at the kind of leader that an organization has, their approach to leading, the kind of tools that leader generally employs for their approach, and then how that affects and what it evokes from followers. And I like that better as a way of looking at organizational, philosophies and activities, because it synthesizes at least 3 of those researched areas. So now let me present his work to you in a much more digestible form. And what I'm going to be doing here is showing you 5 different leadership styles. And I'm hoping that as I talk about them, you will identify the one or the hybrid of maybe a couple that are most at play in your own workspace. And even though we all are working in what could basically be called a law office, although I assume they're government law offices, and there are some, distinctions about that, but we're all working in at least a similar environment with similar kinds of jobs. We have different roles and so forth. Nevertheless, different leaders you can have very different leadership styles even so. So here we go. So the first kind of leadership is scientific management. I think Fairholm starts with this because this is the kind of management that, if you've ever thought about the Industrial Revolution, it's like when we specialize somebody and they're at a particular place on a production line and they learn to do this one thing very well. Of course, that's not exactly how law offices are, but some of the features of scientific management also can be applied in other kinds of organizational environments. And those features are efficiency, focus on getting the work product out, using our resources in a very controlled way to make sure that we have enough resources and that the work can be done on time, and lots of measurement to make sure that we have achieved what we started out to achieve. The way that impacts the followers or the employees of this leader is the employer uses incentives to get the job done. It's kind of the carrot and stick thing. The employer wants a lot of control. The employer gives a lot of direction and expects it to be followed. And again, the tools and behaviors associated with scientific management is measuring and then rewarding individual performance, organizing a lot and planning a lot so that everybody is on a page about what's going to happen. Okay, the second kind is excellence management, and I would say that this particular management style is widely considered the best management style to use. I'm not necessarily agreeing with that. I think management style depends on your sector and what you do and the environment in which you do it. But as a general rule, excellence management is considered best practice by many, many organizations. So the leader in this particular excellence management environment is basically trying to have a learning organization. They're trying to foster a continual improvement, doing better, providing better service, more productivity through learning. And they're always encouraging people to transform themselves into their next higher iteration. They encourage innovation because part of getting better is innovating. They encourage quality and excellence in work. Their approach with their followers or employees is all kinds of motivation, psychological, not just rewards, engaging the people in problem definition and solution. And we're going to talk more about that later because it's a big part of change management. And having a respectful work environment. Their tools are focusing on process improvement itself rather than just focusing on productivity. I can liken that, I think, for those of us who are lawyers and find ourselves engaged in negotiation. If you find that the communication is breaking down in your negotiation, you have to stop focusing on getting to solution and turn your focus to actually solving communication problems. This would be somewhat the same. In order to get to your productivity, you have to make sure your process is working. Active listening is very, very important, and being accessible as a leader to your people and whatever level of leadership you are. Okay, so values leadership. It's interesting. I've seen values leadership in action many times. Values leadership without more almost never seems to get an organization where it wants to go. And yet, I want to stop here and point out to everyone that the very fact that you are all here and you want to create a gender neutral and unbiased work organizations is all about your value leadership. So basically, you're trying to help individuals become contributors based on the fact that they share a value, and that because of that value, they come to agreed upon goals. And we'll talk about it later, because defining those values and deciding what to do about them is sometimes difficult, but we all share a value here of believing that we should have more gender neutral workplaces and more empowerment of social identity groups that are marginalized. And then we encourage high performance and self-leading. I studied an organization in Vermont that some of you may have heard about, Seventh Generation, and they sell all kinds of toiletries and cleaning products and whatever that are healthy for the environment. And they had a values driven leadership. And they had values, they had like 7 or 8 values, and they were on everybody's wall. And no matter the size of the decision you had to make, whether you had to decide where to purchase lunch for a meeting, or whether you had to decide about a supply chain issue in the rainfields, they basically had to consider all those values at every step. I will tell you that their business sold in the middle of my studying it, and the new person who came in changed from a values leadership model to another model, and they were much more successful at actually affecting their values with the other model. So keep in mind that values are very important, but value leadership without more won't probably get us there. All right. One of the things that I will say about value leadership before I move on is one of the most important tools is visioning. We're going to find that visioning is an important tool for us now. And when I say visioning, what I mean is talking to the people who are actually marginalized in an office, or if you don't have that many, bringing in some allies from outside to help you think about it, and basically together envisioning what your office would look like, how it would be different, how it would be better, if all of what you wanted to achieve had occurred. So you're not even starting with the steps to get there. You're starting with what you want it to be like, how it would be different, how it would be better. And then once you know that, what you have your target, what you're shooting for, then you can begin strategizing to get there. Okay, this is cultural trust cultural leadership. And this is basically about mutual trust and collective action. It's similar in that the collective shares values, but it's more about we're all in this together. It's not an individual rights model, if you want to think about it that way. It's about prioritizing your mutual values and your organizational conduct in light of those values. So the leader is cares very much about developing trust with the employees, building trusting teams, and fostering shared culture. In trust-based organizations, you often find quite a bit of non-work related activity that people do together so that they can bond, get to know each other, and take care of each other. The tools and behavior are creating and maintaining a culture through storytelling and, again, visioning, sharing governance. You have people more bought in when they get to help with the governance. And then I think you may remember that the scientific management measured and rewarded individual performance. Trust-based leadership measures and rewards group performance. And finally, whole soul, also sometimes called spiritual leadership. I see this a lot in nonprofit organizations where people come to their work very, very passionate. And basically there is, in this organization, the people are equally as important as the product or service the organization is designed to sell. A whole soul leader believes that by helping each employee fully actualize that that person is going to rise to a higher capacity for carrying out the work. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. I've seen it work. The Nature Conservancy, when I was hired there to do their public policy, had a whole soul leader, and he had just left and been replaced by the guy who hired me, who was a scientific manager. The scientific manager was very concerned with efficiency and planning and so forth. And all of these employees that were gathered around this whole soul leader because they believed in that and felt really good about their personal selves suddenly found their personal needs left in the dust. So that's a different lesson about bringing in new leaders into old cultures. But basically in these cases, you find that the leadership is very involved in developing its people along with developing its product or service. Okay, so I don't know if anybody recognized your leadership style or the way that your offices work. I hope that you did see things that you related to, because it's important to begin to think about your organizations in terms of those elements. Nobody's probably ever asked you to do that. So I hope that just by presenting you with those things, you'll start to think about it. There is another thing, however, we can't just leave it at what kind of leadership and what kind of tools do we use and what is the feeling and approach. We also have to look at the flow of power and communication through an organization. What you have up here in front of you is, a traditional hierarchical organization where you have somebody at the very top who the buck stops at their desk, and then you've delegated certain aspects of the work through other managers down to the folks at the very bottom level. By contrast, this is a flat organization. Many universities are flat organizations because they are not only is research and teaching done by faculty, but usually 90% of the administrative tasks are also done by faculty. And although they sometimes do form teams, mostly each of these faculty members is doing their own thing, and they're isolated, siloed in their offices. And when decisions have to be made, information goes out to everybody, and they rarely even get together to discuss it. They usually do it by email, and power and communication power is distributed and communication has to be distributed as well. Decision making, when everybody feels the same sense of power, is harder. And I say that because if you have a hierarchy, you may have an opinion, and you may even have a circumstance where your opinion is welcome, but then you have to live with whatever the person on top of you decides. That's just the way it goes. In these flat organizations, nobody has to live generally with anybody else's opinion. And so bringing these people around to change can be difficult because everybody's got their own idea of whether and how it should work. Okay, so this is, I think, perhaps more of the type of organization or hybrid that you might see. Well, let me just start by saying this is a team run or departments in one organization where basically the responsibility, power, and communication happens inside these teams. When you see a team or departmental, strong departmental organization like this, what you know is that not only are they asking, is that idea a good idea? They're also asking, how does that idea impact our team? And would this be good for our team and our team's work and the people in our team, or would this create problems? So a decision like this gets discussed in teams, and then the team will basically jump on or off board with something. Okay, so here you go. And what I really want to say about this for the purpose of change management is that it's easier to make decisions about what change needs to be made and how to make it in a hierarchical organization because there are fewer people involved in the decision making. As I said, no matter if you give your opinion, everybody has to capitulate to the person on top of them. However, when a decision might be easy, implementation in a hierarchical organization is much harder. And the reason is the people at the bottom do not necessarily understand why something is necessary or why the powers decided that it needed to be resolved in a certain way. And it isn't usually obvious that their individual needs have been taken into account. And so people passively or actively will resist change in these hierarchical organizations. I was once asked to work with the Bureau of Reclamation that has a big facility outside Hoover Dam in Nevada, and they were having an awful lot of problems with accusations of sexual harassment, actually, as the case may be. And they asked me to come in and teach the managers the value of mediation because they wanted to stop going to the Justice Department with all of these things and see if they could mediate some of them in-house. And when I got in-house to do this workshop, after listening, I started doing what I was doing, but I also asked them for feedback about, what was going on inside what was keeping them from wanting to do mediation and so forth. And what I learned was that the people at the top were fine. The managers at the top were fine with mediation. It was an order that came down from on top. They saw the benefit of it and they tried to put it into play. But what I heard from the middle level managers were that they were caught between the people on top who created this mandate and the people on the bottom who were being accused of sexual misconduct, who did not want to mediate because they felt that any form of giving in, of mediation, would result in some kind of giving in. They wanted to hold their ground and say that they had not done that. And so mediation did not seem like an answer for them. Of course, there's a lot, we could go into and talk about that, but we won't. What I want to point out is that the people at the bottom had some very real reasons for resisting mediation. Those reasons could and were overcome for a lot of them as we walked through this. By the same token, the people at the top who understood this process as a resource problem were completely not talking or not understanding the people at the bottom who were seeing this as an integrity and personal employment record problem. So when you're trying to implement change, and some of the things that we're going to talk about when we get to HR tools, you're going to begin to see that some of these things that we're talking about implementing, it's going to be easy to see why you're implementing them at the top, or by contrast, it might be easy to see why the people at the bottom would want them. But the reasons at the other end are going to be different, and it's going to make it difficult to figure out exactly the right way to do this so that everybody gets their needs met, and we will eventually get to how to do that. Hey everybody, if you notice that I've changed clothes and I've changed locations, you're right. When I cleaned up the original video for the workshop, There were things that I pulled out because they wouldn't make sense to someone who was watching the workshop video later, not in a chatty environment, but just viewing. And one of those things is the breakout session. So I don't want you to lose the thinking opportunity that that breakout session represented. So I created this little video. I'm going to invite you to actually pause the video right now and get a piece of paper and a pencil, or pen, whatever. And I'm going to ask you some questions, and I think those questions will help you think through the best way to facilitate change, or to look at change in your own organization. So just go ahead and pause it. I'm going to hum a little. You can go find a pen. Da 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 da. Okay, I'm going to assume by now that you have found something to write with. So anytime you make change, change is difficult. What we want to do is we want to not only look at the substantive change that needs to be made, which will all have to do with processes that have gender bias or other kinds of bias built into them, but we also want to think about the pathways of change in our organizations. We talked a little bit before this recording in the workshop about the way power is distributed in different organizations, and you will have recognized that you are a very top-down, or you have a lot of teams where each team is its own little power center, or that there's some other form of power distribution. It's important to understand who makes decisions in each of the areas that you have in your own organization, and how those decisions filter to other areas. It's also important to look at what processes your organization typically uses to make change, because those are the same processes that everyone in your organization is already very comfortable with. And instead of changing processes, you might consider how you can best utilize your processes. Now, I want to make a caveat to that, because if your processes tend to leave out a lot of people, if they are very, very embedded in only the top folks in your organization, or if there's a certain group of folks that have the power, that always exercise the power, this might be a good opportunity for broadening those who share in the power, particularly to women in this case, but also to other minority identity groups in your organization. But putting that piece to the side, those pieces need to be identified, and you can make those decisions to the extent that you can use existing change mechanisms. People will be comfortable with those. People will know how to utilize them. People will realize that change is happening because this is the same path that brought change before, and you will just have an easier time of implementing. If to the extent that it works with your substantive changes, you can utilize existing change processes. So I'm going to ask some questions. You might just make a few notes to yourself as you are thinking about these questions, and then it would be great when you're done with this workshop if maybe you can bring 2 or 3 people together from your office, or I don't know, your team or your department, to just maybe think about this with you, and maybe even pull into that little group some folks who have been actually responsible for facilitating other changes in the past, because they will have really experiential answers that you can use. Okay, so what was the last time change was made, a big change, or even maybe not the, across the organization change, but some kind of important change was implemented in your organization or your department? What was the process? That would look like, who started it, who made the decisions about how fast and who would lead it, what were the means of communication, who were the people charged with doing that? Were there any particular processes, whether they were kind of formal, written processes or informal? You know, how were questions answered, and how did the discussion get rolling the last time there was a major change? So I'm just going to encourage you to actually put this on pause while you think about the last change and how that all came to be, and jot yourself some notes. All right, I'm talking away, so I assume you put this on pause or you decided not to do the exercise, although I hope you eventually will, if not. The second question is, in other times when you've tried to implement change, what barriers did you encounter? And how did you go about removing those barriers? Was it a certain process that removed the barriers? Was it a communications process or a dialogue process? Was it was it anything about who you had to bring to the table to make it happen? Sometimes when you don't have the right people at the table, change doesn't go smoothly. And when you figure out who needs to be there to help you convince people, or needs to be bought in because of their influence, can be people, could be communication processes, could be timing, trying to do something too fast, could be trying to figure out why things that are new are in conflict in one way or another with things that are old, and how you can make that transition more smooth. Anyway, you're just thinking about what happened the last time you implemented change. What were the sticking points? What were the barriers? And how did you address those? Okay, sorry, that noise you hear in the background is my dog sneezing by my feet. Okay, so go ahead and pause the recording if you'd like, and come back when you are ready to move to the next question. Okay, so next question is, say you have a great idea, any great idea for your office, and you really want to put it into play. Who would you want to help you? Who would you be excited enough to tell your idea to in the first place? Who would you ask to help you, and how would you want them to help you? What would you want from them specifically? And really try to understand understanding who you want to help you and what you want from them, I think, helps in a lot of ways. One, it tells you that you have a sense of who can make things happen, or who likes to partner with you. And also thinking about what you want from them helps you make more concrete exactly the steps that you have to take to get things going. Who in your office can you count on for support? That is the next question, and it goes kind of with who do you want to help you? Who is always gung-ho for trying new things? Who are those people? If you can make a list of those people are going to be your allies more often than not, and you want to excite them and bring them on board too, because if they're your allies, they're going to be able to help you with your efforts, and you won't be in it all by yourself. Then, in contrast, who is the person who always prefers the status quo? Who's going to need to be convinced? And in the past, when change has happened, how have you brought that person along? May have been more slowly, might have been you had to show them something. They might be from Missouri, the show me state, or it might just be that they were reluctant to go with it until they realized everybody else was going to go. Who are those people, and what are they going to need? You may as well get that stuff that they need ready from the get-go, and just to help soften their opinions and help them come along. Okay, so the next question, and again, feel free to stop this recording or back it up at any point to give yourself time to more carefully think through the questions I'm asking. this goes back to the question of where is the power? How is the power distributed, both formally and informally? So formally, who do you need to be your champion? Who does everyone need to see is on board with this for it to be serious? And that might be more than one person. It depends on the structure of your office. If your office has distributed power into 3 or 4 different agencies, then you might need to find the power broker in each of those power centers. If it's just somebody up the ladder in a very hierarchical organization, that's like when this person says something's going to happen, we all know that it's going to happen, then, who is that person? But also don't neglect the informal power brokers. Is there someone or multiple someones in your office who have personal charisma? Everybody likes them. They're the center of attention at the water cooler, or when it's their birthday, more people show up in the office for cake and ice cream, whatever it is. Who are those people that are well liked? Because those people who have a lot of positive friendships in your network, in your organization, will also have a positive influence if they are involved in the change. So can you bring any of those in to your team for this change issue? And finally, it's important to ask yourself, which of the issues of gender bias do you want to start working on first? What are your priorities? You are going to have some priorities that are difficult tasks, more difficult tasks, and some that are low-hanging fruit. And I want to talk about this a little bit. I don't know about any of your offices. Some of you, if you did an anonymous survey of all the women in your office, if you were just looking at gender bias, and if you are looking at bias more broadly, of all of those who might think of themselves as a minority identity group, and minority could be anything: disability, racial profile, it could be anything. I don't want you to be too narrow about how that looks. But if you were to ask all of them, what are the biggest problems? If you were to have an anonymous survey and you saw that that sense of not being taken seriously, or sense of being paid less well, or being, whatever it is, you might see that there are some really big problems. There might also be some lower hanging fruit, like looking at the wording in your job applications, for example. It might be easier to rewrite your job applications than it will be to take on some of those other projects. The question that you need to ask yourself in those cases are, which of these are the most important to change now? Which ones are having the biggest impact on our gender profile, if you will? Which of these can we get some quick wins that will make people feel like we are actually moving forward while we are working simultaneously, but over a longer period of time on the harder problems that we need to solve? So these are questions to actually talk out in your staff meetings, or in your team meeting if you have a team that is charged with facilitating a project to eradicate gender and other kinds of bias. But these are the questions that you really want to talk through before you get started, before you even come up with your strategy. You are going to look at the processes that might already be in place that you can use because people are already comfortable with them. You definitely need to ask the question, is there any bias in our process? And if so, then even though you want to use as much comfortable process as possible, there may be places you need to tweak it. And that might have to do with who's in power, who's got the power, who's in charge, what's the approach, etc. Then you need to look at barriers. What are the barriers that you have experienced in the past when trying to implement other change, and how did you overcome those? be ready. Just prep yourself for the, for the good parts and also the problem parts. Who do you want to help? Who is always, who is a change maker? Who is an influencer? Who likes to run with a creative idea? Who can be counted on both for supporting your idea, but also for making time for you? And then on the other side, who might need to be convinced, and what kinds of stuff do they usually need to be brought along? Just get that stuff ready in the first place to mitigate their objections before they can make them. And then remember, you may need to look at your power structure and figure out who are all the people who have both formal and informal power who you would like to bring into this. And finally, knowing all of that, what are the issues that are so important you must start now, and which of those are longer term and which of those are going to be low-hanging fruit, and try to at least start on one big thing and maybe 2 or 3 smaller things, so that while you're working on the smaller things, you've got some progress to show. While you're working on the bigger things, you've got some progress to show. Thank you for listening to this, and I'm going to go back to my other outfit, my other environment, and you can watch the rest of the workshop. Thanks. Bye. This is kind of like a meta thinking about our organizational processes, which is something, we don't do that much. If we're political animals, we know that our offices are political places too. We may have a sense of how to move through them, but we don't actually step back and identify things like barriers. So I'm really curious, what are some of the barriers that your groups discussed in your offices, barriers to change, and what were some of the ideas for overcoming those barriers? Yeah, Rob.
I think that I thought one of our individuals gave a great answer, which was communication, and that they felt like there was always not always, but there's a little bit of new versus old. There's a little bit of technologically, I'm tiptoeing, but technologically more savvy than, and that the solution was roundtables, which I think work really well if you have a group the size that allows for it. When I'm looking at a 27-person organization, I might not roundtable everything, but then when you break it down to a Durham office or not mine, but or our Robinson office or whatever, getting those people in the room, that can really, that's how they overcame.
I think that's a great idea, Rob. And I think even if you have a large group, you can do roundtables in the format that they call cafe, which basically means you bring everybody into a big group and you put them at different roundtables, and then they can report out and you can have the benefit of everybody's thinking. And I will just say, communication, 2 things. 1, communication is critical when you are trying to implement change. So when you see that communication is styles or processes or barriers in your office, that's one of those things where you have to solve the process before you can actually do the work. And the other thing that I wanted to say is I lost my thought. It just went out the window right as I was opening my mouth. All right, other group, what are some other barriers you came up with?
Well, one barrier that we talked about, and I think is probably true, is that when things have been going along in the same way for so long, that the idea of change and implementing change becomes really difficult, which is true, I think. We talked a little bit about what are the 3 models that you put forward, Sandra, that do we fit into, and I think the agreement was it's kind of a blend, large organizations, are going to have more difficulty because there are more people who have been there longer who are going to be resistant, if that makes sense. In other words, you have a couple of new folks come in who have ideas on how things can be better, or done in a better way. If it's a small organization, you might have to convince three older folks, employees. And I mean age-wise, I mean length of service. That's what I meant. Don't get me wrong. It's not an HR thing. But there's more resistance the more employees you have, and perhaps small organizations have a quicker chance of becoming more agile than a large organization. This is me interpreting what everybody had to say. If Kevin and the others have ideas, and but my question was, how do we discuss these things? And these models seem to me to be more set, and you had said this at the top, for understanding different types of organizations, maybe ones that are where the goal is maximizing profit or some other financial goal. Our goals, of course, are quite different, which is, how do we better represent our clients? I guess you could maybe make a jump that a higher profit would be happier or better outcomes, for our clients or something. But so it's a little difficult to decide which one of these models, do we fit into.
If first, can I ask you your first name, because your moniker there is very hard to pronounce.
That is my name. My name is Cicida Ribbum. No, I'm sorry. My name is Richard McGough. I'm sorry.
It's okay, Richard.
That's-
What I wanted to say is, models are just useful for when you have a problem. If you can find a model that fits your problem, then you can see what we know about how things operate using that model, and that can educate you about ideas for your own situation. In most, probably in most government agencies, you've got people at the top who are being influenced by external, lawmakers and stakeholders and whatever. You've got people inside, different departments that have a whole completely different set of problems. You can literally look and see if a model fits a team, that it might not fit the whole organization. Or if you are looking for solving problems of either communication or input, you can see that where you have teams, that developing an opportunity to present the ideas to a team might be the right way to go for the teams, whereas you might need to find another way to approach the people who are not necessarily working in those teams. These are just to do nothing but bring to your awareness that different structures, different organizations, different approaches, mental models, mindsets are going to require different tools and different approaches. And the reality is, when you are trying to do a major culture change, like we are talking about, where you should be looking at everything from like how you hire to how you do succession planning and everything in between, and how you interact with your stakeholders and how you interact with your clients and so forth, where you're looking at marginalization across everything, you're going to basically have to take each piece of that separately and ask yourself, for this problem, like the one that I am not going to talk a whole lot about, but I'm going to touch on it, is you have to ask yourself, if there are gender problems for your people when they go out to the court, how do you approach another whole nother organization on this topic in order to create a situation that's a collaborative attempt to relieve those marginalizing behaviors? And so I just want to make you aware that that this is a system, and that you have to be aware of the system if you really want the change to happen. And I think I think, was Rob, were you first? You were talking about the communications and how are you going to better communicate? That's a very good example of needing to communicate in different ways and with different folks. What other stuff did we come up with? Teams.
Sandy,
Yeah.
you made a point that I just want to draft on with regards to the change of the structure itself, especially the type of law that we practice. We're in the criminal law field. So it's probably really the only type of law, that and domestic law, where attorneys are in a mano fight in the trenches. And so typically attorneys in that trench are by themselves and they're fighting. So historically, and I can't speak for the big urban areas, but in the rural areas, it's still very much of a male dominated field. And so if you're a female attorney, especially if you're in private practice, they are very, very few and far between because they're fighting against the whole world, it seems. I mean, but the thing about being in the public defender's office is that we, at least as a institution and as a stakeholder structure, you know, we can tell certain people, and sometimes just the friction itself, to just cut it out. And it's, but we also have to, and I think Atrice and Willa in our group both mentioned that some of it's just trying to empower our attorneys, especially our female attorneys, to just in the morning, for example, when you're in district court and you see all the guys huddled around drinking coffee and just talking, just to get in there and make yourself known, because those conversations, although you may not have time for them, they're extremely important because you may can get a little tidbit as to what officer's there, what officer's been fired, how's the judge, how's the district attorney, you know, what's the lay of the land so that you can manage your cases for that particular day. And
I
so
totally understand.
So that's one of the things that we, having a PD's office, and not to mention having a PD's office or having some type of firm that's more than two people. Sometimes if you just run it in packs, you know, and you got a pack of 3 over here and you're a pack of 3, then y'all can just come together and discuss strategy. So it's a work in progress. Other areas of the law, I think, tend to be better at that, but it's the trench warfare that we're constantly in on a day-to-day basis.
So I want to just make a suggestion. I liked everything you said, and I appreciate those comments. I want to give you another thing to think about on top of what you suggested. And that is that, you know, there's a lot as a woman, and actually I was a lobbyist for a long time, and a lot of what you said applies. It's a slightly different, but what happens at the water cooler, information is everything in that field. And I have been put in my place as a woman for being a woman many times in that environment. And I think the thing that we also need to do, aside from thinking about, which is really good, what tools we have available to us, and you just listed some of those tools: run as a pack, you know, tell them to knock it off, those kinds of things, but also to ask the woman, how do you think I can best help you? What do you need to feel comfortable? And the reason for that is, if you think about it, and I'm just going to tell you as a woman, all right, like I'm caught in this place where I don't want to have a man stick up for me, because that demonstrates exactly the problem, that I don't have the power to do this myself, right? But by the same token, I can't undo the marginalization of women without men participating in that. So I haven't even thought about this question in a long time, to be honest with you. But if I were your junior lawyer, or even if I was just a woman lawyer in your office and I was having this problem, I would really appreciate it. And I'm sure Alison will get to some of this when she gets to mentoring, but I would really appreciate it to have the opportunity to talk through with you, what kind of help can you be that would not then put me in the position of, oh, she's bringing her big brother again, you know, because that doesn't feel good either. So these are all conversations about what power do you have and how can you use it, but also which pieces of that power am I happiest if you use.
You know, that's incredible. You just said that, Sandy, because I just paid somebody $100 just yesterday or 2 days ago from the marriage counselor saying that I need to sit there and listen to my wife instead of trying to listen to her problems and then trying to fix it, because I'm always trying to fix things. And so that's exactly what Sarah told me, is that I just need to sit there and listen and just let the problems, or sometimes have them talk through it. And then sometimes the solutions just, and my administrative assistant's starting to bust out laughing now. But just to sometimes just by talking it out, the solution sort of presents itself immediately. But yeah, that's exactly. I just paid $100 for that too. So,
Well,
so,
sorry.
on a daily basis, so.
Well, honestly, I think that your wife probably knows what it is she needs, but to be quite frank, in this environment of gender bias that we're talking about, I'm not even sure I do know what I need. I would probably want to listen to you talk about all the things you can do, and then I'd want to engage with you in a conversation about which of those things makes me most comfortable. So anyway, I appreciate everything that you've shared here today. Anybody else have any feedback on barriers before we move on?
I love Debbie's comment, by the way. That comment just is a really positive, happy comment.
Yeah, yes, it's good. All right, I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to go back into this whole change management thing. I really wish. All right, here we go. Okay, so, oh, for crying out loud. There we go. So as I said, there's like 13 pretty well-known change models, and I am not going to go through them all. This particular picture right here is from Victoria Satir. I think that's how she pronounces her last name, and it's her change model. I'm not going to take you through her model, but I chose to use this visual because I think that it is a very good visual representation of what happens no matter which model you use. Okay, so basically this yellow line thing in here is the status quo, and it's just what is happening. And then the foreign element is basically when you drop a new program into the status quo, and this is what happens if you don't plan well, I guess. So, and sometimes even when you do, what you have down here is this downward dip that represents two things. One is resistance. There are going to be some people who resist to change, no matter how positive the change seems, and no matter if it's clear from an organizational perspective that it is good for the organization. That would be that trust culture leadership, where we're looking at what's good for the organization. It's not going to feel good to some individuals, and there's going to be that resistance. I prefer active resistance. I prefer people saying, I don't like it, here's why. That is so much easier to deal with. But you will also get a lot of people who say, I have to go along to get along because I don't want my boss giving me a bad evaluation, but I am not going to really pay any attention to this. I'm just going to keep doing what I've always done. All right, so then there's some chaos too, and that has to do with, you know, we all get very used to, somebody made the point of how hard it is to change. I think that might have been Richard, made the point about how hard it is to change when you've been doing something for so many years. And there's chaos when you try to implement new, you know, if you've ever moved from one house to another, it's just like, you know, sometimes you're on autopilot and you accidentally drive yourself home to your old house from work, right? It's that kind of thing. You just do things the way you know how to do it. And then as you get to that place, and you are creating, you're being creative, and you're trying to figure out how to make this work. You have these transforming ideas, concepts, and we're going to talk about iteration later. I think iteration is a big part of making change work. And then eventually the changes become integrated into your culture, and you have a new status quo. Iteration is really important. When I was a lobbyist, a policy lawyer, one of the things that I used to say is anything we come up with, any legislation that we propose, it's really just a hypothesis. It's an experiment waiting to happen because it's just in paper. And not only was it people who are trying to figure out the best way to do something, but then it got negotiated, right? Anytime you are in a, you've got 90 legislators and you have to get a majority of them to say yes to something, you're going to have to negotiate how it happens. So you had some people who really knew what they were talking about, experts in the field, who figured out this program and then drafted legislation so that it would work. But by the time you get done negotiating pieces of it with all those people, the thing that comes out of it is like a broken machine before you start, right? So everything is an experiment and a hypothesis, and that is going to be true with the ideas that you come up with to implement gender neutrality and to lose the bias in your offices. And as you implement things that you hope will work, just remember, you're trying it, you have the best of intentions. When you see it doesn't work, you stop, you back up, you ask what's not working here, and you tweak it and move forward. Don't expect your first attempt at undoing something that has so many hidden pieces that you don't even know are there, that's been there for centuries. Don't expect it to change right away. All right, so these are just some of the better known change models. What I want to say about them is a couple things. First, all of these change models in different detail and using different language, but they all acknowledge the stuckness of where you are. If it was easy to change something, you would have already done it. It's not easy to change something because it's embedded in the way that you do things and the way that you think and the way that your organization operates. So they all start with an acknowledgement of the stuckness of your situation. And then they take you through different kinds of steps to unstick you, to decide what will be, when you're going to break from the past, what you're going to substitute, and then they talk about how to implement it. So again, I'm going to send you, after we're done, some information on these different change management models, and something may feel more comfortable for you. It may be just that the language that they use to talk about that stuck, unstuck, and innovating your way out, maybe one set of language may resonate with your crew more, and that's okay. They all cover the same basic things. For us, I have selected 2 to talk about, and that's the Mckenzie 7S model and design-centered change. And the reason that I have picked these 2 is because they are designed to let you fit the change to your organization. They have that ability to, adjust and fit built right in. All right, so the Mckenzie 7S model, if I would have just put those words that start with S there, it would have been hard to understand what's going on. But the first idea is that you're coming up with a change strategy. What is it that you want, your strategy? What is it that you want to happen, and how are you going to get there? Again, you've got this vision. What strategic moves do you have to make to get there? To do that, you've got to study the structure of your organization. We just talked about that. Your systems and your processes. You need to look at your values and your culture. We talked about culture. We didn't really talk that much about your values. You've got values that you espouse, and then you've got values that you aren't talking about, but you are acting on. So I think if you were in the first workshop, I gave the example of the Jewish federations of across America espousing a value of gender of women's empowerment, but their actions demonstrated that they were not acting on their espoused value. They were almost entirely unable to promote women into the CEO position of their organization anywhere in the nation. So when you have a value that you espouse, you need to stop and look at, just like we just talked about, barriers to change in your own organizations. What are the barriers to you achieving the values you espouse to have? And then you're looking at your style or manner of work. How do you normally get things done? One of the questions we didn't talk about, but hopefully you talked about in your breakout group, is the last time something needed to change, what was the process? So there are already processes for change, usually not this kind of major change. But if you can figure out how to use familiar processes to create the kind of change that you want to create, at least in part, the more familiar and comfortable people are with the processes that you use for change, the less resistance they will give. And then you have to be fully involved. Everybody, especially for a change like this, everybody has to be involved. We'll talk about that more later. And then you have to kind of do an asset audit, if you will. What are the assets and skills and resources that we have to bring to this task? And what other assets and resources do we not have that we might need to bring to the task? You have more assets and resources than you know internally or than you've really thought about. But when you start thinking about what's it going to take, we're going to need some excellent communication planners, some strategists around just communication. Who does that inside, and can we bring them onto the team to help us do that for this particular change? And then you might find that you don't have enough knowledge in-house or resources, and maybe you go outside. You ask people from other organizations that have done this before to come in and talk, or maybe you want to make sure you're a comfortable place for people with disabilities, but you don't have any disabled people in your staff. You're going to go out and get some and invite them in to help you think this through, because you need those resources, and maybe you need other kinds of resources. Think about where you can get them. Are there organizations out there that can collaborate with you? Okay, so now we're going to talk about design thinking. Design thinking is for wicked problems. Wicked problems is a fun phrase. I like it, but it just basically means that problems that have been around so long that they emerge from all the ways we do things in our society, in our bigger culture, in our internal organizational culture. There's so many reasons why these problems are stuck the way they are. If you were at the first workshop, or if you had a chance to listen to the video, we talked a little bit in the beginning of that workshop about the historic things, the separation of hunters from homebodies, and the roles and the things that have been around for so long that are just part of our societal culture in one way or another. We don't even think about them, and those things hold these problems in place. So we can see some of the things that hold these problems in place, and at other times we're going to think we understand what's going on. We're going to try some solution internally. It's not going to work, and we're going to have to again iterate, go back and ask ourselves, we tried these 3 things, these 2 worked, this one didn't. What's the barrier? What's stopping it? Drill down deeper. How do we have to change? So I just want you all to know that I drew that picture of the table with all those complicated legs. When I have to take that table down, it's going to take me a lot of time and a lot of work. All right. So these things on the right, have a beginner's mind. If you have kids or grandkids and you see them see the world for the first time, to solve an old problem, we have to get outside old ways of looking at things. And it's hard to have a beginner's mind, but we want to drop all of our assumptions. We have to be prepared to learn from failure. We're going to have some failures because we've never done this right before. We want to be creative. We want to innovate. We'll talk in a minute about how we can do that. We want to create confidence around the process and our prospects for change. We want to be empathetic. We're going to be asking the people who we are affecting this change to benefit, which are not the people who are already privileged, but those who haven't. And in order to help them, we need to hear them. We need to do our best to develop empathy. It's hard to put ourselves in the shoes of someone that we're not, and who's had life experiences that we haven't, but we, again, go back to stories and trying our best to understand. I like to point out that, there's a lot of stories of lives and circumstances that we've never experienced, but, they put it in a beautiful movie and we go to the theater, we watch, and we come away with a ton of empathy and new understanding and in tears, right? So you have to be there for the people in your own office. Embrace ambiguity. Again, this is a problem. We've never tried to solve it before. The first time you ever tried anything, there was ambiguity. But, you know, after a while, there's knowledge and then there's success. Be optimistic, and again, be comfortable with iterations. Hang on. All right. Okay. So this is, I can't say it's my favorite picture of design thinking visualized, but I couldn't find another one, and maybe I'll have to draw one someday myself. But the thing that happens if you think of this design thinking as going from left to right, the first thing is the designers are just people charged with moving us through this process. And what they're going to be doing is basically listening. And we talked about this before. You need to bring in the people who are affected and say to them, how do you see yourself as being marginalized? And what would this situation look like if it was not that way? How would it look for you? And that's what you're going to try to achieve. All right. And even if you come with a barrel of ideas, you're going to try to achieve those things that they want. And maybe you'll put the barrel of ideas on the table to give them some ideas about what could be, but then you're going to let them talk about what their priorities are. Then you're going to work with them collaboratively to figure out how to implement those things. Pilot some of your ideas on a small scale, see how it works, come back and iterate and come up with a better tweaked solution and go back out there again. This is design thinking. And the main thing I want to say that I haven't said about it already before I move on is all the answers are inside your own offices. The people you're trying to help, plus all the creative brains, all your answers are there. I'm going to start running through some human resource tools. These are the ideas that are just out there that other people are using. I don't want to say that loosely. There are ideas that have been very hard fought and hard thought, but for some organizations who aren't sure where to start, it gives them some things to talk about. And it doesn't mean that everything needs to happen or that it all has to happen all at once, or that everything will be a fit for your organization, but it will certainly start conversations that can lead to the answers to those questions. All right, so this is just a list of law office diversity activities. Add it into your mission statement. Educate internally about the importance and benefits of diversity and inclusion. Ask for, listen to, and implement women and minority employees' input. Include diversity and inclusion criteria for selection of outside counsel and even supplier purchases. Probably you hadn't thought of that. Identify a highly respected internal champion that people look up to give credibility to your activities. Designate a diverse team to shepherd the program. And again, if you don't have the diversity that you need, ask an ally to come and work with you. It's just like if you have a board and you don't have all the people on your board of directors that you need, you can tag outside volunteers to help you. Budget funds to support your program, and also use some funds to support other things that are happening in your legal community, like Minority Bar Association activities. Implement implicit bias training internally. Develop metrics so that you can measure to see whether your D&I goals are happening. If they're not, go back in, ask yourself what the barriers are, tweak again, and do it again. Be very transparent about your program and your results, both your successes and failures. We don't like to fail. We don't like to say this didn't work for us, but I think it's important that we acknowledge the failures so we know where the work still remains. And then finally, use the data that you collect to tweak your programs and strategies as necessary. This is just generic, but these are things that any law office could be doing. All right, so first I want to talk about hiring. Basically, there are hiring best best practices when it comes to diversity and inclusion. You may not have, somebody asked in the chat whether all these things need to be facilitated by an outside expert. The answer to that basically has to do with your culture, whether people inside your organization listen to each other, whether they have, whether there's a broad respect and desire to go with this so that people's personal motivation and passion will take them there, and whether you feel like you need help, either expertise or time. But it's always an okay thing to do to bring in allies or consultants to help you fill in the gaps, whether they're knowledge gaps or capacity gaps. There are tools like OnGig, and I'll show you what that is quickly in a minute, that are basically designed to help you. There are tech tools that are designed to help you hire more diversely. Language review across all your collateral. Review and adjust your job requirements so that they don't speak specifically to men or specifically to women. Laser target your recruitment vehicles. And what I mean by that is, if you're looking for more women, or if you're looking for more people of color, or if you are looking for any social identity group that you think is underrepresented, there are places, both virtual and real, where they congregate. If there's a, you know, like a woman lawyers bar, there's a newsletter that you can advertise in or write articles for, and there are probably luncheons where you can go and speak on a topic which signals to those groups. Same if it was an LGBT group of lawyers or a Latino group of lawyers, you're going to have, if you're going to move into those spaces, that's a signal that you're an ally and that you want to be inclusive. Okay, interviewer training. Basically, you need to train your interviewers not to ask the kind of questions, and to ask the right kind of questions that don't turn people off or make them uncomfortable. You might consider a diverse panel of interviewers. And again, if you need to bring in a lawyer from another firm who happens to be a woman of color or LGBTQ or whatever it is that you're missing and you would like to include and hire in, consider bringing in a diverse panel of interviewers. Request work samples. Judge people on what they're capable of instead of on your internal biases that you don't even know you're using. Send intentional messages to the community and to the legal community about your desire to be inclusive. Have somebody on your staff go through your resumes before they're actually looked at by someone who would be part of the hiring process to remove any indicators of social identity, whether that is something that shows that they belong to their parent teachers association, or whether it shows some kind of cultural, ethnic, or racial background because of their name, whatever. Take all those things off. Consider doing simulations of the kind of work that you would want them to be doing in the office. In your interview, it could be fun, maybe a little nerve-wracking, but once you get into it, it can be fun, and you'll learn something about how they think, and you, again, will not necessarily be dependent on your internal biases. Then actually obtain candidate feedback, whether you hire them or you don't. Do an exit interview, so to speak, and use that feedback to tweak your process. And then collect all the data from all these things you're doing, see where it's getting you, and see where you need to go. Okay, so these are some actual job interviews, job notices, and you can see this one to the left is Bitcoin, and they really don't like these words underlined in red: competitive, drive, aggressive. You know, it's hard to even see that applied for lawyers because we want to aggressively represent our clients, but it does apparently turn some women away. You'll have to be mindful about that, but use your best judgment because the sector of law itself may be slightly different than people who are going to work for Bitcoin. You can see in the middle that AmeriCode talks about their paid maternity leave. You probably want to talk about parental leave rather than maternity leave. Physicians across continents, which is something like Doctors Without Borders, they are looking for an assistant to the chairman. It should be the chairperson or the chair. And then down here, the Military Veterans Affairs is recruiting, and they're talking about veterans and or their widows, veterans and their wives. And that makes an assumption that veterans are men. So just go through all your collateral, go through your website, go through your job descriptions. Okay, so here are a couple of examples of intentionally signaling inclusiveness. On the left, the company is called Axon, and you can see that they've gone way beyond anything that Title VII says. They link ancestry, they use the words including pregnancy next to sex, gender identity, genetic information, veteran status, and then they talk about empowering all their employees, and they invite people who might need some help, assistance with the application and recruiting process due to a special need or disability to call and ask for help. The game designer, which I didn't really know this is a thing, but I'm going to have to turn all these ads for game designers over to my granddaughter. She's a game person, but you can see they're trying to tell you about their culture. We embrace a diverse mix of voice. We don't just accept difference, we celebrate it, we support it, we thrive on it. And again, they also went beyond anything in the law when they were listing all the people they want to make comfortable. Okay, so these are some tech services that are just out there if you're not sure how to go about things, if you're just want to get either some consulting, or maybe just, look at a place that does this and see what kind of things they consider just for your own education. OnGig basically helps you eliminate biased job descriptions. Canvas is a diversity recruiting platform. They know how to target social identity groups and how to do that. That Blend Score is a diversity, equity, and inclusion analytics technology if you want to know how to keep track and what to keep track of. And this Diversio, is my understanding, helps you keep track internally of how you are bringing your workforce in and including them and their needs. Okay, here's just some actual targeted recruiting website, the Women's Job List. There's for people who are differently abled in the upper left-hand corner. The upper right-hand corner is Black Career Network. These are places to advertise your jobs. And in the bottom right is an LGBTQA+, as my friends tell me are all the initials I need to know now, website for recruiting. Okay. I'm not going to read these to you. They will be in the slide when you get it. But again, these are retention best practices. And I'm going to go through just a little bit about these things that we can do once we have hired to make sure that people are comfortable, and to talk a little bit about the ones that are maybe problematic but have really good results. So affinity groups are putting together a group or a team of people who come together based on a social identity. I find that affinity groups are extremely helpful for organizations that want to be more inclusive. The reason is, if you are one voice trying to bring to the attention of your employer something that needs to change, it is much more chilling, it's more frightening, it's more risky to be that voice. But if you have joined together with all of the other women to talk about women's issues, and together you set your priorities, these are the 5 things that this group would like the organization to focus on, and you are able to go as a group to your management, you will get a lot more done. You will feel safer. There is much less risk of anybody looking at you sideways. And so I strongly suggest that that social identity affinity groups be developed. If you don't have enough of any particular social identity to form a social identity affinity group around that identity, then go ahead and create something like just an inclusion committee and ask those people who feel that they are in a minority of any kind to sit on it and to have those conversations. Okay, so pay transparency. This is one of those things that basically creates a lot of conflict internally at firms. And yet it is also one of the things that and there are many ways to handle it, but it's also one of the things that when there's pay transparency, people feel less like they are being underpaid. They have more certainty that they are being paid equitably, and they are more loyal to their organization. 58% of everyone in a pretty big survey of 8,500 employees said that they would leave their job to go to a company where there was more pay transparency. Now, the problem with pay transparency are multiple. One is if people don't know what the employer is paying, then the employer can, if they can get away with it, they can pay some people less, and that creates extra money to have a larger staff over the long haul. And so commitment to pay transparency might mean that you have to raise some salaries, and that's a money issue, right? And even at the other end, some people are afraid of pay transparency because they feel that that might mean that their salary was going to be known to all of their peers and colleagues. And
Can I
sorry.
interrupt for a second?
Yes, please.
So in the chat, and I would have predicted this, Bert has said he very much dislikes pay transparency, and I should inform you that every state employee's salary, not including benefits, but just their base salary, is available through the newspapers here in the state. And so they not only compare to each other, but mostly they compare to the district attorney's offices in their areas to see who's making more money. So I'll just let you know that.
All right. So
So
it
actually,
sounds
I
like
have a
you
whole
don't.
section about this in mine, specifically about pay transparency and some of the trends that we're seeing that are going to make pay transparency probably more prevalent as time goes by.
Well, it sounds like that's a non-issue because pay transparency is already there. There are ways to do this that don't involve individuals' exact salary, but also at Arizona State University, my pay is online. You can go look up and see what I make, and we do that. All right. Okay, I guess I would just say this about pay transparency. It's one thing for people's salaries to be put up online and accessible. It's another thing to encourage people to actually have conversations about their pay, especially with their managers, and to negotiate for what they consider fair pay. And that is a cultural thing that your organization can encourage, and it's a good idea to do so. And I guess I would just say to Bert that there are ways to do pay transparency that aren't as painful, but in your case, it's been dictated to you. So I'm not going to spend any more time on it. It will be in the materials that I send out. Okay, so supervision and evaluation as tools for employee success. So one of the things that I teach, and I'm going to bring it up here because it applies, is even though these are not volunteers, we're talking about their paid employees, but I teach organizations how to actually supervise and evaluate volunteers. And the way that we supervise and evaluate volunteers is we supervise them and evaluate them for performance success. And what I mean by that is you cannot tell a volunteer how badly they're doing without losing them. They don't have to be there. So what we try to do is grow them. We grow volunteers. And I have discovered that the exact same tools that help grow volunteers through supervision and evaluation tactics that do that are good for regular employees too. And it helps them feel empowered and do their best, and it trains them to be stronger at what they do, which is different than some of the typical standard supervision and evaluation tactics. And sadly, a lot of people are not a lot of people find themselves in a supervisory position without ever having any training for doing it, and they rely on how others have evaluated them before, and that's not necessarily the best. So basically what we're doing is, rather than being directive, we are helping our employees set specific performance goals and objectives. We're talking about what that means, how much time it would take, what kind of tools they would need, whether or not they feel trained and ready to do those things, and if not, what they would need, what their timelines are, and like what kind of benchmarks should we set, where we come back together and see how things are going and have a chance to talk through anything we've never done before or we're finding difficult. This is coaching for learning rather than judging performance. And another thing that I like to suggest is that we have multiple input evaluations, so that it's not just one person with their implicit bias evaluating one other person and you're kind of stuck with it. I'm personally not a fan of 360-degree evaluations, but there are gentler versions of the 360-degree evaluation where the employee themselves gets to put in some input on who is going to be evaluating them and what those evaluations are going to be comprised of. And I find those to be very valuable. Also, we need to train our managers how to coach and how to understand what language is not neutral, what language is supportive and facilitative, and what language is damaging. And we need to create a culture of support for family and self-care choices, that you might have policies, but people are afraid to use them or take them, afraid to stay out for the entire amount of time that family leave or parental leave would allow, and so forth. We need to problem solve time issues without pressing employees to sacrifice those self-care choices. And we need to create reciprocal communication avenues, including anonymous feedback opportunities, until we have created such a receptive culture that people feel free to bring their issues out without fear of retaliation. And then obviously we need to figure out what our metrics are and measure and use that data to get better. Okay, so this goes back to the asking the person. And right now, the 3 questions that I like to ask are, can you be your authentic self at work? And if not, why not? Do you feel like people make assumptions about your strengths and weaknesses based on stereotypes? At the last workshop, I had everybody say what their professional superpower is. Do people know that about you? Do they know what you're good at? Or do you think people are making assumptions? Do you ever feel like you need to conform to be successful at work? I think I mentioned turning ourselves into a pretzel to fit in can be a culture problem, but also when people aren't their fully activated selves, at least their respectful, appropriate work, fully activated selves, we're not getting their fully activated skill sets. What we're getting is some portion of them worrying about how they're being perceived and taken. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about work-life balance best practices. These are things that we can do. Implementation of flexible work options. There are a lot of choices around that. And I strongly suggest that this is not taken on as a one-size-fits-all, but rather you will have different teams. Just the same as when the pandemic required most people to go home, but certain essential people to stay in offices. There are going to be different scenarios for different groups in your work area. And what is a flexible work option that would work for the folks on that team can be something that they might be able to have input on. We want to find and fix the root causes of overload. Sometimes there just aren't enough employees. Sometimes we try to take on too many cases. Sometimes we don't have a choice in those things. But we want to think about, we want to dig down into that and just name those root causes and begin to use design thinking to creatively brainstorm alternatives. I like this idea. I didn't come up with it, of thinking about a career lattice, not a career ladder. I think that this whole idea that we're going to get in at the ground and we're going to be so ambitious and we're going to just keep moving up the career ladder until we reach some peak at the top is not conducive to people who have kind of a whole plate full of things in their life. They have family that, you know, and personal and career, and that they need to be encouraged and supported, whether they go straight up that ladder or whether they decide to, you know, stop working full time for a couple years and go on a half-time or do a job share or whatever. I think that right now there are stereotypes around this. When we think about that one person who is very driven up the career ladder, we think about that person differently than we think about that parent who is meandering around the career lattice. Even though her work is excellent, we think about them differently. We need to begin to accept that those are choices, and one choice is not necessarily better and the other choice is not necessarily worse when we think about what it means to be a professional. And then leadership has to absolutely encourage and maybe even insist that employees utilize their self-care policies and programs. They're not there for window decoration. Okay, so here are some other things you can do. Articulate family-friendly policies in writing. Guarantee that women will not suffer for utilizing those policies, and give them an avenue for complaining if they feel that they are being in any way punished for that. Consider a realistic paid parental leave period that's based on infants and not on work. I mean, everybody wants you to get back to work at 6 weeks, but infants do not stop staying up all night and feeding every 2 hours at the 6-week point. Yes, this is like problematic from so many traditional levels, but why not talk about it? Support and enable comfortable breastfeeding at work. Collaborate with a local childcare facility to create an employee childcare program, maybe that's very close to your office, that would facilitate some work during that infant period and allow for people to feel better about their parenting and their work. Work with teams, again, to create arrangements that fit the job and the employee. No reason why you can't celebrate parenting in your offices. We celebrate birthdays. Why not celebrate parenting? And then support your employees by shaping stakeholder expectations. And we talked about this briefly earlier. What can your organization itself do to help support when you are so interactive with external stakeholders? And it will depend on how rural, how urban, what the relationships are with the courts and with opposing counsel, whether it's friendly, whether it's war. These are things that are going to be very situational. But again, this is why you ask your employees what they need, and then you bring all your resources to the table to creatively brainstorm ways to get them what they need with the resources and assets that your organization has at their availability. I see some things in the chat. Susan, is there any questions in there for me?
No, I will note that Jessica, Empathic Client Interviews, shared a website, besustained.org, which has, she says, some great resources for self-care for public defenders.
Thank you. Thank
yep.
you. What I want to do is go right into Allie's presentation and make sure she has enough time. Allie, you want to go ahead and go?
Sure, go ahead and let's go to that next to those slides. That's that one. Perfect. So sorry. So I want to start my part of the presentation. I realize I only have about a half an hour left, so I'm going to probably make a couple modifications to be able to fit everything into a half an hour. And I really have 3 distinct things that I want to talk about. One is the role of women in public defense. 2 is some very specific tips to better support women. And then three things that I have used very much in my career that I've found have been helpful in terms of creating gender equity, and that's mentorship, sponsorship, and allyship. And I'm going to go into some detail about that. But one of the first things when Susan called me and said, "Are you interested in doing this workshop?" the first thing I did was call friends of mine that were public defenders. And I know a lot of public defenders. And one of the most shocking things that I found in talking to a lot of women that I really respect and admire was how little there was for women public defenders that dealt with these very specific and very urgent issues that pertain exclusively to them. And so honestly, at the end of this, what this workshop has made me realize is there is a much bigger need in the field of indigent defense to do more to train and support women public defenders. Because I am shocked at how little I could find. But I want to also make a point, and that is that women are finally starting to get some of the respect that they deserve in public defense. And public defenders are getting this moment in the media. And I agree, we need to start this in law schools. I just saw that. And when I was growing up, my watching of public defense and watching courtroom law was Law and Order. So there you have the prosecutor is good, the prosecutor is solid, the prosecutor is strong, and the defendant is either guilty or by mistake. It's never any of the nuances of what actually happens. And so my mother was a professor of popular culture, probably has something to do with why John and I are both so interested in this topic. But I think one of the things was that while I was growing up, my mother spent 10 years writing this book, Law and Order as Seen on TV. And it really talked about how the popular culture and media has really created how we view defendants, how we view crime, how we view victims. And over the last few years, I mean, even looking at what's happened with the First Step Act, we're starting to, as a nation, to really reckon with a criminal justice system that's error-prone, it's rough with racial bias, and we're starting to see these heroes coming in public defense. Like, we're watching these heroes. One of those heroes is Brian Stevenson and the movie Just Mercy, or we're looking at Durham Burton or Brendan Woods in Alameda County, or the late Jeff Tachi in San Francisco. But a lot of these heroes that we're seeing tend to be men. And I remember going to watch my brother speak to a group of public defenders. He was here in Arizona about 2 years ago, and I went to hear him speak. And he put up this picture, and it was a picture of a public defender as a hero. And it was like a cartoon character. And he was showing this as back in the day, we used to show that public defenders were heroes. But I was looking at that picture and asking, where the hell are the women? Like, where are the women in this story about these public defender crusaders? And so I think one of the questions is, why are women public defenders seen on TV as like flat, sappy, or just invisible? And I think there's two reasons for that. One is that the legal position is historically somewhat sexist, and I think we have to grapple with that. But two, there are fewer and fewer women who are entering the field. So when women are growing up and they're looking at these role models, they're not seeing them on television. They're not even necessarily seeing them in law school. It's even to the point when we go talk to new lawyers and we talk about the possibility of becoming a public defender as an incredible, noble career, women keep saying to me, I didn't even realize that was possible for me. Tell me more about what it means to be a public defender. I think many public defenders would say law school is not the place where they learned about what it means to be a public defender or how to be a public defender. And so I want to bring this up because I think the fact that we do not showcase women public defenders anywhere in a meaningful way means that it is incumbent upon us to create that ourselves. So in doing this research of trying to find resources for women, I found two things. One was an NAPD conference that took place last September that apparently they're going to do again. And then the other was an NLADA mentorship guideline for mentoring women. I found it somewhat surprising that that was really all I could find. So I came up with just two ideas off the top of my head that I think are really important. And one is panel discussions for all of your employees that could be done virtually with really prominent women public defenders who can tell their history, who can tell their struggles, who can tell their stories, and who can give some of this advice and guidance. One of the beauties about this new technology is because of it, we can bring people from all over the world to come and speak. But I think it is really important to start to have these discussions where more women are sharing their experience and their story. Then the other is, what symbols do you have on the walls? What do you have? What pictures of prominent women do you have? What celebrations of women winning cases do you have? When we think about indigent defense in America, who created indigent defense? It was a woman. The first public defender was a woman, and the woman who told the story of Claire Boltz was Ms. Babcock out of the Public Defender Service in DC, when in 2011, she wrote a book on her life. But I found it shocking that I did not know that the first public defender in America was a woman. So to me, this picture should be on everyone's wall. And so now I want to move to the next part of this. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, back one slide, sorry. So I want to speak about two things. One is directly as what is happening to women as a result of the pandemic. And that is that as a result of the pandemic, women last month lost 156,000 jobs, while men gained 16,000 jobs. So women are leaving the workforce at very profound numbers. And what we're seeing is that they're not coming back. The Great Recession or resignation, or the Great She Resignation, is alive and well. And I think it's because we have to make changes in how we operate in order to bring these women back into the workforce. And then the second thing that's important is that as we talk about gender equity and as we talk about pay equality, this affects men as much as it affects women. Because if your wife is not earning what you are earning, then it affects your whole family. And I want to talk about the question about pay equity. In the nonprofit sector, and I think this is very true in states, there is a real shift to having pay completely transparent. And in nonprofits, there is a real push to any job description having a salary on the job description. And when I was earlier in my career, I was asked to co-lead the state nonprofit association. And I was asked to co-lead it with a very close male colleague of mine. When it was time to ask for what we wanted, I asked for 20,000 less than he asked for. And the board ended up giving us what he asked for. But that was a very profound lesson to me, that no one had ever taught me in college or in graduate school what it really meant to negotiate for what I was worth. And so I, over 30 years of a career in nonprofit, have probably lost 30% of what my earning potential could be for no other reason than I didn't ask. So I do want to just stress that I don't think we do as good a job as we need to in helping women really learn how to navigate and ask for what they deserve. So one of the things that I think is two key things that I think are critical as we look at the pandemic. One is something Sandy talked about, which is childcare. We have to figure out ways of either making childcare more accessible or giving people more opportunities, more flexibility to be able to deal with complex healthcare, with childcare needs and needs of aging parents and needs of husbands and wives. We need to have better processes to create more flexibility. I think this, plus looking at all the research that we're doing on Gen Z, typical 9 to 5, it's going to become traditionally harder and harder for us to get people to be in the workforce from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, without allowing for some flexibility. But one of the questions that I have is, if you were going to make a change in your organization, what would it be? As a result of the pandemic, if there was a change that would help women that you could implement in your organization, what would it be? And I'm just going to ask if you have an idea to put it in the chat. And as you're putting them in the chat, I'm going to give 9 very quick ideas and suggestions. First, track the data, which you guys, telling you this is you're a state agency, so you are tracking the data, but just making sure that from beginning to end, you're tracking the data in terms of wages and transparency and parity. 2, reset the norms regarding flexibility, which we've been talking about, but embrace flex schedules, part-time teleworking, or even full-time remote working for some people during certain situations. What I know I can't understand are some of the needs that you have in your offices that this may or may not be realistic. Like, I never want to give an idea and have you say this completely can't work. But to the extent that you can think about ways to create this flexibility, especially with younger workers, this is going to become more and more important. The third is making work more sustainable, coming up with ways to help people achieve real work-life balance. I probably have talked to hundreds of young women public defenders because I spent 10 years training at Gideon's. And so I would often be in rooms alone with young women and we would just be talking. Like, the presentation would be over, but always there was a group of women that would stay after the presentation and they just want to talk. And the biggest thing that came out of these conversations, and I would say this is every single time, is there's at least 5 to 7 women that truly want to know, how do I manage my role as a public defender with everything else in my life? And I think what we will see is the number one area where you see a drop off of women public defenders is when they get married and they have their first child. This is where I think a lot of women say this isn't sustainable. And so I don't know the answer, but I think one of the most important questions is, how do we support women who are mothers of young children? And what do we do to help support this? The fourth area is that you're open to new ideas. And I think that you've talked a lot about this today, but it's having a suggestion box. It could be an anonymous suggestion box, but just where people can put their ideas so that we can discuss them. That you could say, okay, at the managers meeting, we're going to discuss all of these anonymous ideas. But if in your suggestion box, there are 5 ideas all about the same topic, that without anyone telling you anything is going to tell you everything. The next one, address unconscious bias, which we've talked about ad nauseam. 6, invest in women-led resource groups, like do a couple focus groups with women, just ask some generic questions, see what answers you get that you're not even thinking about, like maybe just a couple focus groups. And you can do this in your office, you can do this with different people, you can do it with investigators, with admin teams, but really asking, what do you need? How can I support you in being successful? And then involve men in this conversation, because men are critical to this conversation. Then the other is encourage virtual time. You're all in different offices, but if there's an opportunity to maybe have virtual happy hours, not, where people can just sit and talk about things that are important, where they're really facilitated, maybe by an outside facilitator, which is just an opportunity to have a dialogue about issues or new trainings that you'd be interested in. And now I'm going to go into some very specifics about 3 things that you can implement literally right now. One is sponsorship, allyship, and mentorship. I'm reading the comments. So law firms, law departments, and other organizations that recruit diverse attorneys at the entry level usually find that they are woefully underrepresented once you get into more senior roles. One reason is there's a lack of high quality allies, sponsors, and mentors for these women. Most young lawyers have some familiarity with mentorship. In their early years of practice, they're assigned a formal mentor. But what they don't recognize is that in addition to mentorship, having a sponsor is critically important. And sponsorship is a very specific type of investment. It is the investment where you praise the protege's work and give them honest, fair critiques, that you let them know that you're there to support them, that you're invested in their success, that you encourage others to give them meaningful and important responsibilities, and that you give them good clients and then give them the support to represent that client well in a zealous, client-centered way. Give them opportunities to really win. Then one thing that there was a big Harvard business study, and it really said that women tend to be over-mentored and under-sponsored. So we do a good job of mentoring women, and I think women are we're very much, we're raised to want to be mentored. We're constantly told, get a good mentor, get a good mentor. But there's the whole other role, which is this informal role where you see somebody and you see their potential. Make that concerted effort to be their Sherpa, to be their sponsor, to be their guide. And you could be a lateral sponsor, which is basically just selling their skills and competencies and making sure that you say this woman's name quite a bit in the organization. And then the other is that you're a stealth sponsor. They don't necessarily even know you're sponsoring them, but you are making that effort to make sure that you're letting leadership know how good they are, how competent they are. Because sometimes women don't always sing their own praises. So having a sponsor to really talk about what they're doing or giving them advice or guidance, saying, hey, I see you did an excellent job with this, and I'm really impressed. Here are a couple trainings that I've gone to that I think could really help you. Then the second is allyship. And next slide, please. Next slide. So allyship is really about consciously taking steps to eliminate individual and systemic barriers that underrepresented groups have. And anybody can be an ally. It doesn't have to be formal. But if you're on this workshop and you leave this workshop and say, what can I do today to be an ally for someone? Well, one is just identifying challenges that somebody may have that you might not have been aware of, and bringing those challenges to someone's attention. So for example, if you see something happen in the courtroom that's happening to women on a consistent basis, that young woman in the courtroom may not in any way feel comfortable that she can go and explain this as a problem. But if you're witnessing it, you can. And then it's being able to really take the steps, which you're doing right now by being on this call, of understanding what some of these biases are that you may not understand. For example, I may know a ton of things about different people that aren't me, but because I've never lived in that, it is very helpful if somebody is constantly telling me, hey, read this book. Hey, here's a great TV program you might want to watch. Hey, I watched this and I had a really interesting observation. I'd be interested in what you think about that. Just engaging with people is a real form of allyship, letting them know that you see them and that you're empathetic. Even if you can't be sympathetic, you're empathetic to the situation. And then next slide, please. I want to talk about mentorship. Mentorship is, so I just have a quick question. How many of you have a formal mentorship program in your office? Does anyone have one?
Can you use the reaction raise hand feature?
Yes, please raise your hand if you have a mentorship program. Okay. So according to a Mckenzie study, more than 25% of women in the workforce and 33% of mothers are pausing their careers. And part of this is women are addressing that they do not feel that they have enough support at work. One of the greatest ways to build support and retention is mentorship. And mentorship can create some very critical skills. So one of the things that I did last year or 2 years ago, I went to Gideon's Promise, and Gideon's Promise had a big mentorship program that they were launching. They had gotten some funding. They launched the program in partnership. There was these amazing women in Kentucky that led this workshop with Gideon's. And I went back to those women, got all of their materials, and I actually used the Gideon's materials and crafted a full mentorship program for Arrowhead. One was a peer mentorship program, which is women who have been incarcerated supporting other women with lived experience. But then the second program we developed was a professional mentorship program. And in the workbook, I actually, in the handouts that we're handing you, I am going to send you that whole program. The other thing that I did find that I thought was valuable was NLADA had a very detailed mentorship curriculum that they had put together in Texas. And I actually thought it was really pretty good. So I have that also in there. So when you get the handouts, you're going to get the Arrowhead mentorship program, and you're going to get this NLADA mentorship program. I will be happy to talk to anybody offline about this. I'm happy to give you anything that we have, and anything that you have that's Arrowhead, please feel free to take it. If it's valuable to use, please feel free to use it. Next slide, please. So very quickly, just leader versus mentor. A mentor is something different than a leader. A mentor is somebody who's experienced and knowledgeable and can give you some advice, some guidance, but it's also a two-way street. Your mentor is also going to be mentored by you. I have never mentored anyone that I didn't learn as much from them as they've learned from me. And probably one of the greatest gifts that I've ever had as a mentor is that I've probably mentored 5 women, really seriously mentored them. All 5 of them are doing far better than I ever dreamed I could do. They are far more successful, far more competent. But I want to share a story. One of the women that I mentored was a federal defender. And I was not mentoring her on how to be a defender. I was mentoring her more on how to work in a very male dominated field. And I have to say that after a year, this woman left the office and went into private practice. And one of the reasons that she told me she left was because she could not handle the sexism. And so I am only saying that to say that I don't know how prevalent this is, but for this young woman, she was traumatized by the experience. And so it led me to realize that it's something we've got to look at. And so then the next slide. Next slide. And then the next slide after that. So one thing about a mentorship program is that you can put one together and run it virtually. That is something we learned the hard way through COVID. But the gift of that was that it allows us to think about ways in a statewide organization that we could literally create a mentorship program where you are mentoring women that maybe aren't even in your office. You can mentor women that are maybe in another office under the same jurisdiction. Or maybe an administrative support person can mentor other administrative support people in other offices. Like there's lots of ways to create women leaders as mentors virtually in unique and creative ways. But there are really 4 stages, whether you go an informal way or a formal way, which is the initiation stage, introducing them, the cultivation stage, the dialogue, what is going to be accomplished, the separation stage, how do we end the mentorship program, and then the redefining stage. How, once you are no longer quote unquote my formal mentor, how do I then recreate my relationship with you? I would say of all 5 women that I have mentored, all 5 of them are now friends of mine or colleagues of mine, even though very few of them work in the same sector that I work in now. But I would say that any woman that I've seriously mentored, one I've learned so much from, I've been so inspired by, but most of these are people that I am really, really interested in maintaining a relationship with. And then a couple things, next slide, that we can talk about in mentorship. And these are just some ideas that, one is the obvious, how do you handle a judge's sexism? How do you handle something that you see happen at the court? But then there is ethical considerations. What are things you can and can't do? Introductions to your organization. What is the underlying culture? How is somebody going to be successful in the organization? What landmines should they not step on? How a mentor can really help someone navigate a lot of things, but as supervisors, that mentor also helps mitigate some of your role because you have somebody there that you trust that is helping them learn the way of the world, learn the way of the office. So some of the other ideas are working with your client, client-centered representation. If you're a brand new public defender who's come out of law school, one thing that law school doesn't teach you is how to be a zealous client-centered public defender. But you're a brand new public defender and you come in, what are those 10 things if you're a woman in this group, what were the 10 things you wish somebody had told you? What landmine could you have avoided had somebody told you? And maybe even bring a group of women together to have this conversation and say, if I could have been mentored, what are the things I would have wanted to know? And that might be a really good starting point for how you build the mentorship program. And then just, how some of this can be very, very tangible, specific work. How do you look at a theory of the case? How do you build it? How do you look at jury selection? It doesn't have to be specific to gender issues, but this could be an incredibly important thing to have in your office, which is just a way of building this generation of leaders. And it also gives mentors who might be in a position where they're potentially on a supervisory track, might give you an opportunity to sort of see how they're going to be in this role. How are they going to be in giving guidance? How are they going to be in giving advice? How are they going to be in knowing when not to give advice. So this can also be a wonderful opportunity for your organization to think about how you want to build this next generation of supervisors. Next slide. And then with any mentor program, you want to evaluate it. I probably have given you far more tools in the tool guide about mentor evaluation, and we're at 15 minutes to the hour. And I know we have one last thing that we want to go through. I have a lot more to talk about on mentoring. I have a lot more in my notes, and I know we just haven't had time today to get to it. So I really want to make this invitation that we're throwing a lot of things out there in 2 very brief presentations, but I personally, and I know Sandy is as well, but you all know I'm passionate about public defenders. I think public defenders are heroes. My favorite people are public defenders. I only wish I was smart enough to be a public defender. I unfortunately probably back in the day didn't have the same skills to be able to finish law school and with the same cadence, but I have a passion for this. And I would love to talk to anyone. The other thing that is so critical that I'd like to talk about is that I serve on a lot of boards and commissions in my state. I'm invited by my governor, I'm invited by my mayor to serve on a lot of commissions. And I do. I rarely see public defenders on these commissions. I am shocked by this. And in some of these are justice commissions. These are commissions to talk about police and criminal justice. This is about, I'm on a commission on criminal justice and mental health. There are no public defenders in these rooms. We've got to get public defenders in these rooms. So I know how busy everybody is, but if we could ask supervisors to please get you appointed to statewide commissions, boards, citywide commissions that have to do with issues, you all have this expertise and you have so much to say. And sometimes I think our cities and states do not pass good policies because public defenders are not in the room to tell them what's what. And I often find myself speaking on behalf of public defenders, but I am not a public defender. And so when I meet with public defenders in Arizona, I am talking to their chiefs all the time about please get them on commissions because prosecutors are on these commissions. You guys have to be on these commissions. And so with that note, I'm just going to turn it back over to Sandy for a little piece on coaching. And I was kind of joking about the lawyer thing, but once I got involved with Gideon's Promise and I started meeting all of these young public defenders, that's where my heart went. But I just have so much admiration and respect for the work that you all do.
Okay, thank you, Allie. Allie rocks her world. It'd be great if she was a public defender, but a lot of people would miss her. Okay, I've just got a couple of really short coaching videos. There's actually others here that I never intended to show just so you can watch them later. But I want to show you the difference between empowering type of supervision and a disempowering type of supervision. And you're going to see it in both of these. And then when I get done with this, we're going to go to a last minute set of question to you to tell us what kind of help you need, what other kind of resources you'd like so that we can provide them to you when we get stuff to you. What I thought that I would do right now is basically open up the room to a conversation about what kinds of assistance and cooperation you think you might need to make this change or even just to get it started in your own offices. And I'll just give you an example. As I was listening to some of the comments in the chat and also Alison talking, I was thinking, boy, I would really like to come back and facilitate a conversation between the women, especially the young women, and then like to facilitate a conversation amongst them, and then facilitate a conversation between them and the organization's, managers, supervisors, whoever they are. Because as much as I think it's great that we are, running through all of this information that you need to be aware of and giving you lots of resources, I would feel so much better about this if I'd actually brought people together in a room and we started having the substantive conversations, because it's hard to do that. And I'd love to show everybody how to do that. So there are people who can probably do that for you where you are. And maybe those are the kinds of things you might need. So if you can, I'm going to stop the share. And if we can just talk about the kinds of things, help, assistance, where you think you would want to start in your own offices, which things feel like priorities. I think that will help Susan plan future programs and also help Alison. I'd be happy to give this presentation to the judges. I'm sure Alison would too. Help Alison, and I know what kind of materials to get you. Jim, I see you up there thinking. You got any ideas about where you would start in your office?
Could you repeat that question?
All the things we've subjected you to over the last 3 hours, where would you start in your office? And do you think you would get pushback, or do you have what you need to get some kind of conversation going?
I think the thing that hit home with me more than anything was the importance of making the environment conducive to parenting. And I think that there's been a lot of flexibility with the pandemic, with work schedules and so forth, that has been incorporated for social distancing purposes. And I think that in a way, sometimes good things can come out of bad things. And I think that's kind of given us the opportunity to see that there can be a lot of creativity with work schedules. And I know that it has helped some of the parents in our offices a great deal. And I think that that's something that we can develop more and more.
I think it's good to see that making a major change doesn't necessarily screw you up. When necessity requires it, we figure out how to make things work. And especially, I know public defenders are very dedicated to what they do, and they'll figure it out. Bonita, how about you? What hit home for you, and where would you love to see change start? You work in an office with Bert by any chance?
Uh-huh.
I do. As you can tell in this little group chat down here, he and I's gonna have to talk.
No chilling the conversation, Bert. This is exactly the kind of thing you're not supposed to do. Go ahead.
Right. I need you to come here to 212 South Green Street.
I don't think you're going to have to twist her arm. She'd probably have, none of us would complain about coming to North Carolina.
Come on down.
Anyway.
I've already lost the question. I'm sorry.
Where would you love to start? Do you feel like you can start a conversation like this? Do you feel like you have permission, the tools you need, people who'd be willing to start it with you? And what would you like to see happen first?
Oh, absolutely. Normally how we handle things is that the group comes here and we talk about issues, and if it's something that can be handled here, and then a lot of times we will go to to Bert and ask for him to kind of intervene if it's something with the courts or something like that. But usually things,
I knew he's coming in, isn't he? Yeah, you're a team. I knew when he got up and left his office, he was headed for you.
Yeah, he doesn't like for me to join in on things like this. So, but anyway, we try to, if it's stuff internally in-house, we try to work things out here. But if it's something that, like I say, in the court system, we do, include him in and try to get him to kind of balance it out across the way. So I do feel like we have the opportunity to, just discuss and come up with solutions. As you see him sitting in his office with his arms folded.
Well, I have to say hello to Kevin Tully because I see him sitting here.
Ally.
It's nice to see
you. Thank you both. This really has been great. In terms of what strikes me from Mecklenburg specifically, so much, but just off the top of my head, number one, just a baseline, I don't know whether it would be called an audit or assessment of where we're at culturally with not just gender issues, but other cultural issues. And to hear from the employees, everyone that works there.
I really appreciate that, Kevin, because it was one of the things that I thought, gee, we really don't have time to talk about an audit, but, and also people find that overwhelming as a first step in, but I think it's a really good tool.
Well, that was my second comment, was going to say, my head is spinning and I'm dizzy thinking about what that would look like. You know, I think it's critical if we're going to do anything at all meaningful that's going to be broad and have an impact overall on what is a fairly large office. I think that has to be our starting point.
I have to say, I have been a participant in audits in both my personal college and talking about audits for the campus. And there's a big conversation that goes back and forth about whether it's something you can do internally or something that you need an external person for. Especially the people in your office who might feel marginalized are going to be much more willing to be involved and to say what they feel like they need to say to an external person. And there are a lot of things, a lot of these conversations about specific programs that you might want to implement that you can easily have in-house, but I really strongly suggest an outside person for an audit.
Yeah, and if you'll look back into the chat, I posed the question at one point when I was thinking about this and said, is this best done by an outside person?
Yeah, it said KT. I didn't realize that was you. Yeah.
Susan Brooks.
I remember that.
We're going to be coming to you and IDS, actually, I guess more specifically to Mary, to talk about what we might be able to do, but I don't have it within our budget to have somebody outside the organization. But I would not try to attempt to do this myself internally. I just wouldn't. I'm not trained in it, and the last thing I want to do is more harm than good. Then the other thing that jumped out at me, and then I'll shut up, was the language, teaching, training our supervisors in terms of how to, because they do come into a supervisory role, at least in our office, pretty much as mentors. You were talking about, we've identified people. Eddie is on here, Jessica DeLucia is on here. These people were leaders and mentors before they got a title within the office. So it's kind of their natural inclination, but there is specific training available that I would like for them to be able to take advantage of in terms of language and what is supportive language and what is, so that's the next thing, I guess, is for me to help find the right trainings for these emerging leaders.
I just want to interject that I'm not saying don't do anything like it's good enough just to try, but I think it goes a long way to show you're making the effort as well. Obviously, getting results is even more, but like just that first step is huge.
We have only another minute left.
I just want to make one important observation. So you all know I've spent a lot of time in a lot of public defender offices. I've worked with lots of public defenders. And here is 2 observations. One, I have to say this honestly, I've seen more sexism in this than I have in many other areas that I've been in. Like, I've been somewhat surprised at some of the sexism that I've seen. And the second thing that I've noticed is that the skills to be an excellent trial lawyer or the skills to be an excellent professor are not always the same skills to be an excellent manager or organizational development consultant. But I think what we tend to do both in academia and in law, which are the 2 areas that I grew up in, is that we really push towards individual success, and we don't give enough to the managers promoting people into management because they're really good at consensus building. They're really good at dealing with conflict. They're really good at dealing with challenging situations. Just because someone's the best trial attorney doesn't necessarily mean they're the best leader of the organization. And so those are just two observations I just wanted to make before we closed out.
Okay, I'm going to make one last observation myself, and that is that the people who were the most active in the conversation today were the men. And I have no idea why, but I'm just saying it follows a pattern. So I'll let everybody think about that. And I want to thank everybody. Alison and I feel honored and privileged. We think this is actually very important work. On the last slide, and we'll send you the slide deck, but on the last slide are both of our email addresses. We're both very available for questions, or if there's particular material you need or would like to have more of. And I encourage you all to take us up on that, because going over this material is just the beginning, and it's going to be a long journey from where you are to where we need to be. So, and
I just want to add one last thought. Susan called me and asked me if I could do this. And for anyone who knows what my job is, I have no time. So I was going to say no. I was going to say, I literally just don't have time. But this was so, so important. I called Sandy and I said, Sandy, I can't do this without you. And Sandy not only took this on, but she really did a ton of additional work and research, and really just kept like finding a thread and then finding another thread. And really, I think took this to a whole different level that I never could have taken it to without her. So I just really want to give a huge thank you to Sandy for everything that she did to put this together.
Well,
You're welcome.
Thanks to you both, and thanks to everybody who came for both sessions or for either session. As was mentioned, we will be sending out the slides, the materials that they put together, also a video of this one, so you can watch it again, or if whoever in your office missed it, you can share it. And we will also be sending out an evaluation. We didn't get the one in the middle. We'll do one for both sessions that you can fill out depending on what you attended or watched. So anyway, thank you all. Thanks for your interest in this. And if you have any ideas for further training on this or other subjects related to management, you know where to reach me.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Hey, Allison, bye, Sandy. Thank you so much.